Hey, so in this video, let's talk a bit about a topic that's been on my mind for a long time. It's what I now dub the No Man's Sky syndrome. It's part marketing, part game design, and part gaming culture. But before I start, let's do a little recap. Around a year ago, a game called No Man's Sky was released. Maybe you've heard of it. It was a game that had a massive amount of hype behind it, which was a result of a well-executed PR campaign. The game had been showcased and the developers interviewed many times before release, which alongside the press coverage they received, they built a massive name for themselves. But what exactly was No Man's Sky selling? Or put it another way, what exactly was the selling point for No Man's Sky? What were they promising? I won't give the answer now, since I think we need to go further back and revisit the history of games. Games have existed for as long as we humans can remember. Somewhere in the early 50s and 60s, some electrical and computer engineers had experimented with hardware to create interactive programs. Later in the 70s, this evolved into consumer products as the first video games, and with it, the video game industry was born. While video games came in all different shapes and forms, they all had some things in common, and one of them was the visual display. The visual display played an important role in conveying information to players and focusing the experience spatially. Hardware at the time was relatively primitive compared to now, and the visual displays had to compensate for that, with early game developers being focused on creating games that put those visuals to work. Instead of a meaningless green circle, you now had a green sword or a green humanoid. This added context, and even if its initial purpose was functional in nature, it still was something on its own. With advances in hardware, the displays could start producing finer visuals, and with it, game creators could run wilder with their imaginations. The context skin layer for games started becoming simple, small stories. By the time 3D games became a thing, games with stories had become entrenched in video games. They had become the norm, and immersion started becoming more and more important for games. Jump forward a few more years, and the industry's lovely engineers had built lovely pieces of software we now call game engines. Games built by these engines, as Jason Gregory, writer of the book Game Engine Architecture, says, are soft, real-time, interactive, actor-based simulations. That's how deep this particular view of games has become. And with this view, we made all sorts of games: shooters, role-playing games, racing games, you name it. And in all these simulation-y games, we're in control of a character that's doing something. Some games let us do more things than others. Shooters, for example, just let us walk, jump, shoot, and run and maybe open doors with the switch of a button. In RPGs, we can do more. We can also talk with predetermined choices, trade, pick locks, customize gear, ride animals. And these actions creeped as features which were used as advertisement tools by marketers through either back-of-the-box details or in trailers and promotional material. As our development tools became more sophisticated and our design knowledge and desire for immersive experiences increased, we managed to create games with more options for actions in our games. But meanwhile, there was a growing tendency among some players, a tendency that equated more openness with a better game. This tendency was part of what led to the rise of open-world games. And being open-world was seen for a long time to be an absolute positive for a game. It wasn't a matter of artistic choice to make a game. Open-world or linear. Open-world was just flat-out better, but just more costly. So that's the view of this particular crowd. Alongside open-world games and the rising desire to do more in games was a gradual added value to simulation games. You could walk into forums or gatherings and ask someone about their dream game, and they'd enthusiastically tell you about this grand idea they had. This idea which I've heard far too many times in various different variations, that all just boiled down to this: have this really big open world where you can do everything. That was it. That was the end game. I talked about this before, but games have different motivators or aesthetics of play. Depending on whatever the categorization reference is, be it MDA, Bartol's taxonomy, or Quantic Foundry's model, there always was one type of fun and motivator that everyone was pointing at, and that's exploration. Normally, I don't do sweeping value judgments, but this time I'm going to make an exception. Exploration is possibly the most overrated core motivator for a game, at least the way it's commonly understood. Real-life exploration is fun because you go into new landscapes, are able to feel your surroundings through smell and touch, and are able to interact with them physically. And also, let's not forget the dose of endorphin you get for the hiking and exercise. In game exploration, you can just visit a three-dimensional rendered environment. Of course, exploration can have different meanings, but we're not talking about the exploration of the game's state space, the possibility space. But even if, for some, exploration means discovery, discovering new content either becomes repetitive or, in the case that it's not, is handcrafted. So lots of discovery requires lots of content. But what if we didn't need to handcraft all that content? We would be able to have lots of it if we could somehow automate it, right? That's the idea. This is where our discussion of No Man's Sky officially resumes again. No Man's Sky promised procedural generation of that content, and it promised lots and lots of it. I don't care about how far their product ended up compared to what was marketed. Even going off what they were promising, the game already didn't impress me. But due to this phenomenon, this No Man's Sky syndrome, people eagerly anticipated the game. But that's what this is. That's what open world exploration ends up with. That's what building simulations instead of designing games results in. I posit this fascination with simulations is a mostly American case. The prominence of Star Trek and its holodeck and later The Matrix have all contributed culturally to the value of simulations, and judging by the sales numbers of No Man's Sky and similar freeform simulation games like Skyrim and then comparing them to other types of game like, say, Call of Duty, I think there is some statistical backing to this claim too. Either way, I don't see the value in simulations. Simulations have value for us when we need to know something or experience something we can't do in the real world, or if it's too costly to do so. Using a flight simulator to learn flying is an example of that. Games, by the nature of the technology they're built with, simulate worlds, but they're meant to be a virtual worlds to merely inhabit. They're meant to just make the 3D game space, but that's how they've crept in. This is what No Man's Sky was promising, a world wherein you can do lots of things filled with lots of content. Sure, they didn't deliver on some of their promises like multiplayer, but how much of a difference would that have really made? What's the point of going to practically an empty, goalless virtual world with someone else? Games need goals. It's at the heart of every game. Even if the goals aren't gamey in nature, as is the case with narrative games, they still need them. No Man's Sky delivered on the product it was selling, for the most part at least. Whether or not planetary physics were implemented or resource distribution followed a realistic pattern shouldn't and don't change the value of a game. There's a lot of things promised that weren't delivered for sure, I concede that. But I can't imagine the game being significantly better even with them. Even a year later, the game has been updated and upgraded with features significantly, but it's still a goalless simulation as it always was supposed to be. Of course, the press's enthusiasm didn't help, and it was the last piece of the puzzle, the last symptom of the syndrome. Exploration, massive worlds, procedural generation all make for great buzzwords that are really easy to hype up, and the gaming press values page hits and attention and hype above all else. And buzzwords make exactly that possible. They may not lie, but they also don't have the correct critical lens to dissect what makes a good game and worth anticipating. At least, not always. No Man's Sky was, in my view, a wake-up call for many people to notice this trend, and people are slowly pushing back, which I think is a good thing. But we are still seeing this syndrome in other games too. Mass Effect Andromeda was a game that promised exploration, discovery, and building and exploring a new galaxy as its core experience. And despite hoping for the best as a series fan, I knew before release that this was probably going in the wrong direction. And it did. Upon release, many players were left disappointed. And again, that disappointment can be blamed on technical bugs and animation bugs. But again, even those little things won't drastically change the value of a game. The syndrome was present, lots of content, lots of space, emphasis on exploration and player action variety. Even going off what in-house developers told reporters, their vision for Andromeda was basically No Man's Sky with BioWare graphics and story. And yeah, that doesn't work. Video games are a multidisciplinary art form, and they're like all art, designed and directed, meaning they're the fruit of an artist who delicately uses their tools to home in on their vision. The No Man's Sky Syndrome version is to give someone a brush and canvas and call it a day. Where's the design? Where's the art in that? Where's the expression? Most importantly, where's the experience for the end user? Where is that experience designed? It doesn't exist. With Star Citizen still in the works, I hope they don't fail. Least because I don't want to see hundreds of creators left with a failure on their hands. But unfortunately, I'm seeing them also take the same route, at least looking from the outside. My hopes are in the future players and consumers, including game journalists, will appreciate more finely structured and authored pieces of works over free-form simulations, where the emphasis is on things like exploration. Hopefully, over the next few years, our fascination with lifelike simulation cools off. We don't need more empty open worlds. Before I end, as a little personal experiment, I wish anyone who was excited for No Man's Sky before release who ended up disappointed to drop me a comment on what they were exactly hoping for. Thanks for watching.